For you who don't know me, my name is Lanny Hubbard. I'm an instructor at Portland Bible College. Been there for a long time. Been there for 41 years. And I tell that to my students, and that's twice as long as most of them have been on the earth, you know, and it puts things into perspective. I teach a lot of the Bible and some of the theology courses there, but I also teach the different courses involved in biblical interpretation, like hermeneutics and Bible research and so forth. And the session that we're doing here this morning actually came out of the hermeneutics class. And towards the end of the session here, I'll tell you how that happened. People would say, how do you come up with transgenderism in a hermeneutics class? Well, because you have to learn how to apply your biblical study to real issues of life. You can't just spend the rest of your life doing book reports on Christian books. You have to take it out into a real world. And so we try to teach them, how do you study the Bible for topics that aren't specifically mentioned in the Bible? How do you find principles and so forth? And so this was the result now of one of those projects. As we look into it, if you look at your notes, and if you need a set of notes, just raise your hand and Jackson can come around and get you a set. The topic here this morning that we're looking at is transgenderism. The title of the session here is Trans, but the subtitle now, and it causes some people to ask question why I gave it that title, and that is a self-edited image of gender identity. The reason that subtitle is there is because when we look at the area of material that's being made available today on the area of transgenderism, a lot of the younger generation now have come to a place where they are defining their gender based upon their feelings and based upon their subjective. They are the ones who are determining what they're going to be. They are rejecting their birth gender. They are rejecting even their chromosome structure in their body. They say, my body is not an indicator of who I am. I'm the one who determines the gender that I'm going to be. And so really, in our modern day scenario that we're here, it is self-edited. People are becoming what they want to become. And this is a very important thing, because as we look at the topic, we say, how did we get here to the point where science and medicine and genetics no longer speak, but now it's my feelings? It becomes subjective. And so we'll look at some of the big changes that we've had to go through over time now to do this. We as a church find ourselves, and for 2 millennia we have found ourselves, oftentimes in opposition to the culture that surrounds us. Sometimes that opposition will take different forms. If you're back in the first century church, back there, the opposition was political. The Roman government just decided that you didn't have a right to exist. Christianity was illegal. And so Christians were a religio illicita. They were not sanctioned. They were not approved by the Roman government. So the opposition or the conflict that you faced then was political. At other times in history, the difference between the church and society was moral. The society was approving behavior patterns that the Bible condemned. And so the church found itself in opposition or conflict, again, over who decides what morality is. At other times in history, it's moved down to a whole other level, and that's philosophical. Philosophy is such a huge thing because it's the basis of our worldview and everything. And oftentimes we'll see that those worldviews that have existed for a while begin to change. Philosophy is constantly in flux. All you have to do is pick up a philosophy book and you see that. It's constantly in transition. And as worldview changes, the way that people look at life, the way they learn, the way they determine values and everything else changes along with the worldview. And what's happening today is that now we have made some philosophical shifts. We have gone from an age where things were basically scientific and empirical in nature, and we've gone up to a very strongly existential age where my experience is what determines reality. And so now whatever I'm experiencing, whatever I'm sensing, that is what truth is. Now, it's one thing to be in a period of history where the church faces one of those conflicts at a time, but today we're facing 3 of them in one issue. Because what's happening today is that the government, the political, is making laws that now justify and sanction transgenderism, and they're forcing everybody now to follow those and to comply with those, from the kind of restrooms you have to the civil rights that people have and so forth. The moral issue is also involved, because we're not just dealing with somebody changing their gender, but it's very much closely tied with the LGBT community and moral behavior at this point, and also philosophy. How do we learn? How do we process material? Are we just going to throw out centuries of traditional ways of looking at it, and now we're just going to get into whatever you decide is true, that's true for you? And so all three of these have converged now in this trifecta that have come together in this issue of transgenderism or gender dysphoria. The phenomenon that we're experiencing today, and the phrase I just used, gender dysphoria, is the catchphrase that's used right now. It's a phrase that is used, and in defining it, it means this. It means that an individual now is experiencing a conflict. And that conflict now is in their thinking. It's between their birth sex and their perceived gender. Somewhere between the sex that they were assigned at birth, either through genitalia or chromosome structure, the doctor said this is a baby boy, this is a baby girl. Somewhere between that and what they want to be, there is this tension. That tension now creates the dysphoria, which means there is a conflict in here. The conflict is between what I experience physically, what I think in my head, and so forth. And so there's this ongoing tension in there. And it creates a lot of stress, it creates a lot of emotional entanglement, a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, because one day you may be certain what you are, and the next day you begin to doubt. And you go back and forth in this double-mindedness, and the Bible says anybody that tries to live in two realms like this becomes unstable in everything that they do. And that's exactly what's happening. It's an instability that is leading to some very self-destructive behavior patterns, thinking patterns, and so forth. So this is where we are at in this realm right now. And as we as Christians, as a church, it was been thrown on us. We didn't go hunting this one. It got thrown at us. Just like the gay issue did when they started marching down the streets and parading it in front of us. We didn't ask for it. It was thrown on us. And suddenly we have to start making decisions based upon the Word of God. What do we do with this? The church's response now to the transgender issue, though, has been varied. And you go through, because when you look at the Christian church, and like in the United States, the 330,000 churches that are in the United States, their ideas on issues like this, social issues and moral issues, will cover a full spectrum. You will go from an extreme fundamentalist side of this, where it's very, very conservative in nature, and they will look at anybody that even talks about transgender or dysphoria, and they will just condemn these people to hell. These are the people that raise the signs next to Gay Pride Day that says fags burn in hell, and that's the way that they deal with it. It's condemned by God. This is Sodom and Gomorrah. It's not going to be there. The other end of the spectrum now are the liberals that condone it. They actually promote it. And you see this in the churches. You guys watch the news. It was just a couple weeks ago, the Methodist, United Methodist Church split over these issues. And they split now because half of them wants to ordain people that live these lives, and the other half wants to maintain that. The Presbyterians did that a time ago. The Episcopalians did that. And the Catholic Church is even looking at it now. So this is an issue that crawls into the church, and it's something that we don't have to look for. It will find us. It will come to our churches. It will come in the back door, and we're going to have to figure out ahead of time, now what do we do? What do we think about this thing? Do I become the conservative and fight against it? Do I become the liberal and condone it? Or are there any other alternatives? And today we just want to throw a few things at you. In your notes, Roman numeral number 1 that you've got there is just some simple things, because I want you to know this, that we didn't get here by accident. We didn't get here because somewhere in the cosmos they spun a big Jeopardy wheel and the topic that came up was gender dysphoria. No, we got here because of a series of events, series of things that have happened in our thinking, our processing, everything else, the life that we live, and suddenly these things start fitting together and they start melding together, and before long there's a foundation that's created to allow things to exist that probably would not have, a couple of decades ago. These things that we're talking about today, transgenderism, they were in dark rooms, in basements, in alleys in major cities. Today it's on almost every major TV, sitcom, literature, it's there. It's thrown at us. We're being forced now to accept it. So how did we get here? Well, the things that you'll see here, and I've just given you a couple areas, it's not exhaustive, but there are things in our current culture that have caused the elevation and promotion of these. One of them is the media. It's huge. your literature that's out there, your top periodicals, Psychology Today, the New York Times. These guys are promoting this. They're talking about the transgender cycle as gaining momentum, and in their thinking, it's gaining momentum because it's gaining authenticity, it's gaining approval. It's becoming more status quo in our society. And so you'll find articles like this, TV and movies. It doesn't take anybody with a college degree to watch now a show that you used to like, now that's got a new star on it, and it's it's a person that has this. And they laugh at it. They dub in the laughter that makes you conditioned to think, this is approved, this is funny, this is okay. When in fact, when you study the people that really live these lifestyles, many of them are hurting so severely, there is no reason to laugh. Not at all. And yet we are being conditioned in our brain that when we see that, it's normal, it's acceptable, it's beautiful. In fact, when you go into a lot of your police shows and so forth, you'll find somebody from the LGBT community that got beat up and mugged, and guess what? They become the hero of the show. The person that beats them up is bigoted, and usually it's somebody who does it because of religious convictions. That's the way things are being presented today. So we're being stereotyped as being narrow and so forth, even though there's a lot of Christians who are not bigoted. They love these people, and they'll work with them, and that's where they give their life and so forth. But the propaganda of the machine out there in the media is pretty amazing. The internet, you can go on the internet, you can find chat rooms of people who believe this, you can find friends on the internet, you can find websites where you can take a test, a 3-question test, and you answer these questions and it will grade it for you, and it will say, based upon your answers, we think you're trans. And so now a 12-year-old kid that just went on the internet, took a 3-question test, he's convinced he's trans, she's convinced she's trans, and they self-diagnose themselves, and they start forming a path to make some major life changes. Why? Because everybody knows if it's on the internet, it's true. Okay, we all know that. And so the internet just told them who that they are. And then social media, and that is just become the bane of our culture today. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but you find people posting pictures that I'm coming out, I've decided I'm a guy, I'm a gal, I'm going through transition at this point. They do self-edited pictures, they smile and make it look like it's all cool, it's all roses, and other people see it and they're miserable and say, I want to be that way. But remember, they're all self-edited. We only present the picture or the side of us that we want people to see. And so we are being bombarded in the media. The second area there is the professional sector. What's happening now today because of money and because of money that's available, grants to research organizations, colleges, and so forth, more and more of your medical doctors, psychiatrists, and healthcare people are now swinging over that when they find a young person that is experiencing a sense of dysphoria, they're actually approving them to experiment and to look to see maybe if transition is something for them. And where it used to be that a psychiatrist would try to talk them out of it, let's try some other things first. They're now moving them into this, telling them that their feelings at this point are very normal. And so you're finding this going on in their life, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge because some of your major universities and their student health care clinics on campus at the universities are now providing counseling that directs students, college students, this way. And not only that, they're providing cross-gender hormones so that the students can start transition while they're attending college. And colleges are even known today in their advertisement and so forth as being open for this. If you're experiencing any of this, come to our school, we accept you, and we'll even facilitate your transition as you go through. So they're marketing this whole thing. They're making an appeal now to some of the young people that are out there. Parents are being pressured. You find this, parents are being pressured by school counselors, and to the point that if the parents don't cooperate, school counselors now are encouraging children to do things without their parents' notification. State of Oregon, child 15 can now start going into transition without public notification. So you got a mid-teenager that can start going through drug, therapy, hormonal treatment and so forth. Mom and dad don't even have to know about it. And so these are the issues. There is a tremendous pressure. Medicare, insurance companies, the pressure on them to begin to give benefits for these types of surgeries, these types of medical treatments. We're going beyond the necessities of life, and now we're going to the desires of people. And so young people are going and they're putting pressure. The military is getting pressure now. We've had pressure for a number of years that we want to take off any limitations to any position now in the military, so that whether you are gay or whether you're transgender and so forth, you should not be restricted from any position that you want to have in the military. I served in the military, and I know this, that if certain people are in there and they have certain life persuasions, it creates a working environment that can be very, very dangerous. And when you're in a combative situation, those things can actually act against you. A lot of people say, oh, we just got to give people what they want. But when lives are on the line and people have to think about it, and you got to trust your six to somebody else that you don't trust with their life decisions, it really brings a dynamic into that is a challenge. But see, that's the pressure that government agencies are facing right now. And so we have to consider that. What you're also going to find as you go down is you're going to find organizations, and there is a whole community out there, the transgender community, and they are beginning to really put pressure on politicians, on lobbyists to go in there and so forth, and they're putting pressure on them at this point to comply with some of their requests to get people in, to lift the ban, the stigma of some of this off. A couple of things that the trans community is doing that's very interesting. The language that's coming out on the internet. If you go onto some of these trans websites, you read the language of what they have to say about you and your church. It's very harsh. You need to know that. You are the bully. You are the bad person. You are the boogeyman. You are the bigot. And that's understandable. We've got to know this. Back when our American culture was predominantly Judeo-Christian in its value, and the majority had that value, it was easy for us to call the other people the bad guy. But now that we've switched and secular is majority, we are now the bad guy. And we are being treated now the way that we treated some others before. It's coming home, okay? And we have to expect that. That's just the way that it's working for them. Universities is a real challenge. A good book I'd like to recommend to some of you. It's called The Coddling of the American Mind. If you have not read that, it's a secular book, you need to. The Coddling of the American Mind has to do with the transition that's taking place in colleges, public education now. And one of the big issues is this, that students now, as they've been coddled, they've been brought up in a generation saying, you're the best, you can be anything you want, and so they're convinced. They're total entitlement. You know, they're convinced they can be anything they want, which includes gender. And they come up to school, and it used to be that when you go to college, you would go to a class and you would hear different opinions. And the purpose for college was to listen to varying opinions and then let each of those speak for themselves. Let truth stand for itself. Go back to the Greek model. We would debate, we would argue. Truth is the one that will be standing at the end because it makes the most sense. But nowadays what's happening in the colleges, if students don't want to hear it, they boycott the university. They ask for the firing now of administrators, or they have riots on campus when guys like Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro try to go on and speak for the conservative thing. These kids riot, they demolish buildings and everything else. Why? Because they've been conditioned that says you don't have to listen to anything you're uncomfortable with. But what happens if what somebody is telling you is the truth and you don't want to listen? This is nothing but educational censorship. And it's being done now against conservative values and traditional values. I can guarantee you this, if you read The Coddling of the American Mind, you'll get mad. You'll get mad. I recommended it to one of the gals that works at work, and she said, you always recommend books, and I love them, but I hate this one. And I said, why? Because it makes me mad. I want to raise up my hands and say, are you all idiots? You know, and she wants to do that, and she goes through, but I know what it's saying is true. We live in a different world today. We are the minority. And we have to know the pressure that's being put on universities. We have to know the pressure that's being placed on physicians and doctors and clinics and so forth. Two guys that took a real hit in the last couple years, you've probably heard their names come up in literature. One is Paul Mchugh. How many of you are familiar with Paul Mchugh? If you're not, he was the head of the psychiatric department at Johns Hopkins University. He was there, he sat in the chair position at Johns Hopkins for 27 years. He is the one who got Johns Hopkins to stop sexual reassignment surgery, to start switching boys to girls. It was his influence. He got fired over this because he took a traditional point of view that says that gender dysphoria now is a mental disorder. And he treats it as a mental disorder. And because he called it a disorder, which implies it's wrong, it's bad, he was lifted from his position. John Hopkins began to do transitional surgery on people. Why? Because people didn't like a man that stood up for the truth. Ken Zucker from Canada, who did a lot of research up there, literally he went to work one day, walked into his office, they told him to clean off his desk because he upheld traditional values. He says this stuff is based on the fact that there's a tremendous disorientation, anxiety, depression. There are mental disorders underneath that, and he was relieved of his position. See, research institutions and universities, they're threatened by the money that goes into them. We will withhold grants if you keep that person in a position of authority. And these people are fired at this point. And so they let him go. But you know what? Some of these old guys like Paul Mchugh, he says, I've been doing this long enough, I'm old enough, fire me, do me a favor. All right, you know, I've been fighting this for decades now. I'll just go get a private job in the sector and continue to write books, okay? I'm too old to deal with this. So they don't care. And that's why they're willing to say the things they need to say, because they're not afraid of losing their job. They're not afraid of their credibility. They're not afraid of censorship from peer review. They're not. They just say what they really believe is true. And that's why some of these guys actually become heroes, even though they become the victims that are out there. Roman numeral 2 in your notes is, what has enabled now our current cultural situation? What has enabled this now? And the first one that you're going to see there on your list is philosophy. And I mentioned to you, our culture has gone through a huge shift in areas, and one of them is the philosophical area. Philosophy, and some people approach philosophy negatively because the only time it's used in the Bible, in Colossians 2:8, it's used negatively. It's used as something that kidnaps people's minds and takes them away from the simplicity of God. But philosophy itself is just the science designed to explain reality, explain the background. It's called the mother of all sciences because it explains reality and all the little peripheral issues, such as how do we learn, how do we know, aesthetics, morality, and so forth. And so they try to give definition to how does this thing work? Well, what has happened over the years, and it's not been a new thing, it's been an older thing, is we have come to accept a new particular area of philosophy, and it's called metaphysics in here. Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that explains reality. Is reality just one thing? Is it just all matter? Is that all that exists? Or is all reality just a figment of a great cosmic mind, and so there really is no matter out there? We're just all somebody's dream at this point. And there are guys that actually believe that everything you see, we are just a hologram to this big mind that's out there thinking, but we don't really exist. And so you can go from one end to the other in the great spectrum that's there. But one of the branches of metaphysics, or the explanation, is called dualism. Now, dualism goes clear back to the days of Plato. Plato created what we call a cosmic dualism, and that is he divided reality of the universe into two spheres. There is a sphere of the spiritual ideal, everything up there. There's no matter up there. It's just all ideas. They're eternal. That's all good. Then there is a lower tier, a lower level, which is anything physical and material. It's inferior to the ideals. The physical is just a representation now of the pure ideals that are up there. And being a philosopher, he pointed everybody to the ideals. And he minimized the body. He minimized the physical creation. To the point then that if you were a real Platonist, as long as you had good ideas, that was okay, and it didn't matter what you did with your body. And it led then to an approval of a degeneration of the body. You could do with your body what you wanted to. This dualism went into an ancient form of religion called Gnosticism, in which what? As long as you knew the right facts, you could live any way you wanted in your body, because those two spheres never connected. And living, you could sin all you wanted to, but as long as you had good ideals and your upward level of thoughts and values were okay, you're cool. And this two-tieredness now has come into, we live in a dualistic age, because you'll hear people say it all the time. What you think in your head are your truths, your ideals, keep them to yourself. But when we get down here and how we live, what I do with my body at this point is up to me. I don't have to have a consistency between the upper level and the lower level. I can believe one thing here and live totally the opposite. And that is the freedom that extreme dualism gives us. And Gnostics would do this. They would live in all kinds of open sin, but they would say, but I follow truth. And even though their lifestyle was getting them into trouble, we are here. And so we have separated facts from values. Values are what you hold in your head, facts is where you live. Okay? And we've got to the point where the things in our head are more important than the facts that we live with. So, if I wake up in the morning and fact is, my body is boy, if in my head I think I'm girl, that's priority over my body. And they're separate from each other. And what I think in my head can be totally irrelevant to what I see in my physical body, and that's the realm I live. That's the real me that's up there. That is called the autonomous self that's up there, and whatever I think in my head, that is reality. Okay? And so we live in a day now where we're doing this, and it's amazing. Plato started that 2,500 years ago, and we're just putting a modern application to it today. A great book to read if you're into reading is Love Thy Body. How many of you have read Love Thy Body by Nancy Pearcey? You need to. She starts the whole book with the whole concept of dualism, and then she spends the whole rest of the book saying that these are all the things that we do with our physical bodies because we've already convinced ourselves philosophically what we do with our bodies doesn't matter. And so it leads to all of these things. She does a masterful job in there. The book is about 2.5 years old. The minute it hit the market, it became an award-winning book. She deals with it so well. She has written books with Chuck Colson. She is just a top-level thinker. And if you counsel young people in the area of moral purity, the hookup culture, going out and dating people, and so forth, the whole LGBT community and so forth, even to life habits that destroy, the cutting and the branding and the destroying of this, she's got some great material. And yet, she's compassionate. She's a woman, she comes across, she does not criticize, she does not come across in a hyper-fundamental way. She's doing something very rare. She's loving people, but she's also believing the Bible. And that's a unique tension that needs to be maintained in the middle. And so the metaphysical thing, the other one is evolution. Now what evolution has taught us now is this: everything is in process, which means what? That if you believe in process, and some of you may not be familiar, but there's a whole area now that's called process theology. That means that even theology is in process, even God is in process, and so that all the moral values are in constant change because the world is changing, and we need to adapt to the new world. And so which means what? The values of your parents and so forth that were back there, those things need to change. The next one is theology. And now since most of you are youth pastors, this is an area that we really have to work on. Our understanding of our theology sometimes gets weak in it, and it's like parenting. Sometimes all we have to say to our kids is, no, don't do that. Well, that works when they're 2. It doesn't work when they're 16. Okay, it just doesn't. And so we have to come up with some answers to things, and we need to begin to probe into the areas of theology to come up with some of these. I've just highlighted a few of these as we go down, and we'll look at some of the theological issues a little bit later in here, but we need to know this because the Bible tells us this, and it's in Romans chapter 1, it's in verse 28, and it says this: when people no longer considered that the knowledge of God was worthy to retain, God gave them up to a reprobate mind. It's one of the strongest scriptures you'll see, but what it shows is this: when people no longer keep God in their thought process, and God is absent from their thought process, the thought process goes to worms. It just goes bad. And they get a reprobate mind, which means they can no longer distinguish between good and evil. It becomes totally arbitrary to them. They cannot see their decadence. They have no ability to even see how far they've fallen. And because they can't see that they're fallen, they are optimistic that they're better than they really are. And so they will pride themselves in this, but yet they're fallen, and if you try to come and counsel them and anything else, they'll laugh at you. It says, we are immoral, and there's a great book. Again, I recommend a lot of books because that's what I do for a living. It's a book called Ideas Have Consequences, written by Richard Weaver. Ideas Have Consequences was written in 1948. He was a teacher at Chicago, University of Chicago. He was not a Christian. He's what we call a social prophet. He can predict the future just by seeing what people are doing. He doesn't need it, thus saith the Lord. He doesn't need a Bible. He just watches social trends. And here we are in 1948, and he predicted that where we're on, the course that we're on, there's going to be a year that we're going to look at ourselves, and it says we are going to be immoral, but we will have no capacity to even perceive our immorality. That's where we're at. Our grid has been totally rearranged. We can't see that we're fallen. We're okay. And by the way, if you read through the Bible, you read in Hosea, it says of sinful Israel, when she got to the bottom of her pit just before captivity, she said this, "Go ahead, search me. You will find no iniquity in me." And that's what she says. Going through all of that and self-delusion. The area of aesthetics, number 3, beauty. Philosophy has this subcategory, what determines what beauty is? And today we go through, and beauty has been totally rearranged from the natural beauty, the simplicity of nature, to now where beauty is a young girl 16 with 2 scars on her chest and 5 o'clock shadow, and we say that's beautiful. Because we've changed our standard for what is beautiful. When God created it, it's good. Today, it's scarred. And yet we're okay with that. We have lost our sense of beauty that is out there. We look at political philosophy, personal freedoms that are out here. We're into this age where my rights, my freedom, I have this is so crucial. I listed for you there solipsism. You may not be familiar. Solipsism is the belief that my beliefs are the only thing that count. It's a total narcissistic belief that whatever is in my head, that is truth. Nothing else outside of my opinion is truth. So you can't tell me anything. And that's where our narcissism and our culture has taken us. Then we go on and we go to sociology. Sociology, and I have to touch on this just a little bit. There are things that are happening in our culture, the way we behave around people and so forth, that are affecting our young people. Number one is group dynamics. What we're finding in our young people today is that they're so influenced by their peers. Now, we've talked about peer pressure before. I mean, my youth pastor when I was a kid talked about peer pressure. Don't give in to peer pressure. But it used to be peer pressure, you only had it now when you were at school and you were in the corner and somebody bullied you. Now today, you carry your peer pressure with you. You know, every time you go on here, somebody's telling you what they did and that's the best way to do it, and you're an idiot if you don't do it. And so we're going in here and you see this amazing thing. We have peer support. We have cluster groups. You go to your high school, you see all these little groups running around and they're buddies. And one of them decides that they're going to go trans, and guess what? A couple others the next week decide they're going to be trans too, because we have what's called the cohort or the contagion effect. It infects each other. Somebody has never even thought these thoughts, but that person does, and everybody likes that person, so if I want recognition, I've got to do that too. This is the contagion. It's an epidemic. It's called a psychotic epidemic, and this is what it's been referred to in our day. And this is what social pressure has done. A lot of our kids are going into this not because they really feel dysphoria. It's because of the social pressure. It's becoming popular that's out there. And the scary thing about it is this. Statistics will show that teenagers who struggle, and by the way, all teenagers struggle with who they are. The minute you hit puberty, you are a dud. You know, your voice cracks, your body malforms, and everything else. Every teenager is going to be dissatisfied with their body at somewhere along the line. That's called normal, okay? But they go through and they begin to influence each other out there in this. And as they do, they begin to put pressure on each other, and then they take it home, and then they go up to their room and they sit quietly up in their room, or they go to the internet, and before long they're convinced by this outside pressure, something's wrong with me, I have to do so, I have to change. And this is the peer pressure that we find. You've got the personal incidents. Now, this one, number 2 here, is one that I really want you to think about for a minute. Because, you know, we could stand up here, and I'm not a fundamentalist. I'm not going to scream and yell and say these people need to burn. I have great compassion. I have students that come to PBC that suffer from things like this. I have kids that come there that suffer from same-sex attraction and so forth. And you know what? They're beautiful students. But what I have found as they sit and tell me their story fits under number 2, and that is their history. They have been bullied. Why? Because they're different. They've been bullied not only by their friends at school, they've been bullied by their parents. because a young boy grew up and he's got an older brother who's a football player and he's not. And his daddy picks on him and daddy never accepts him and shows preferential treatment to him because why? He's atypical. He doesn't fit a stereotypical image, but he's all boy. And you know what? That boy is going to look for male reaffirmation. And if he only finds it in a gay or a transgender community, then guess what? That's where he'll go. But he needs acceptance. He needs love. Behind many of these stories is tragedy. It's behind great pain. And so we've got to look at them not as perverts, not as deviants. We've got to look at them as fractured people, people that Jesus loves. And we have to understand how we can open up to them. The size of the family, blended families. Do you know how many young girls have been molested by their stepbrothers and their stepfathers? And the more you see the divorce rate go up, the more blended families, which increases the opportunity. And after a while, this young girl says, why be a girl? It only gets me raped. I'll be a boy. And you can begin, and even though you look, don't do that, but yet you understand why. There's such tremendous hurt that's down inside of them. The trauma that's there, even trauma down to the divorce. Why didn't Dad stick around? Why wasn't I a good enough son that he'd stick around and raise me and play ball with me and take me camping? And why this? Am I such a bad boy that my dad doesn't want to stay around? And father absenteeism is one of the biggest sociological problems we have in our culture today. This is the trauma that has pushed a lot of these young people over the edge. It has pushed them to do things that we think are illogical, but for them, it's a way to mask a lot of pain. It's a way to avoid a lot of pain, and we have to know those things. I'll just give you a name here. The clock keeps ticking. Her name is Lisa Littman. Her last name is spelled Littman. She's a professor of behavioral psychology. She teaches at Brown University. She wrote a paper called The Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria. She calls it this because very simply, she has noticed that the rise of kids suffering from dysphoria has just skyrocketed over the years. And she says, what has caused this to go up? And it's not because of anything that's natural. It's because of the social media. It's because of the bullying. It's because of all the stuff that's happened in society that has just propelled these kids over. And her paper was dismissed. She submitted it. Brown University pulled it because of so much pressure, but then she resubmitted it to scientists for peer review. They said her research is accurate. Brown University resubmitted it, said this is good stuff, okay? And she did. She did her job. She crossed all of her T's and dotted her I's. Science is there, and we're looking at it. I'd love to go through more of this, but I'd like to recommend one source to you. His name is Leonard Sachs. How many of you have read any of Leonard Sachs' material? He's written a number of books now on family and marriage, but he's written a book called Why Gender Matters. He is a MD, he's a PhD in clinical psychology, and he deals with people that have gone through dysphoria. His chapter on transgenderism and so forth should wake everybody up, because his premise is this. We get the idea that if I'm a boy and I'm going to become a girl, it's easy. We can flip-flop back and forth because there's no difference between boys and girls. People, there is a difference between boys and girls. I've raised 3 kids. My oldest boy, when he got to be 2, he'd grab a stick and he'd start going pew, pew. And he had never seen a TV show. He had never seen a gun. He had never seen a cop. And he gets a truck and he goes vroom, vroom. Don't tell me there's a difference, no difference between boys and girls. There are. And even when the boys change to girls, they think there's still boy in them. And what they find out is that they still behave like boys even though they've reconstructed their bodies to look like girls. Why? Because every cell in their body has an XY chromosome. They got 100 trillion cells that says, you're boy. And science is telling us this, and Leonard Sachs has got some great material, great advice for parents, great advice for pastors. How do you handle kids that really are going through a genuine battle with this? They really are confused about who they are. The medical field, what are they doing? There's just all the different things that are out there today that they're trying to do in the reassignment type of surgery and doing it. And our kids had a lot of fun when they researched that. One team. Jackson, was that your team? You did that? Did you do the medical stuff? They went up to OHSU and they went into the library and they started studying in the medical books up there with the doctors, all this reconstructive reassignment surgery. They had to have inner healing by the time they came back. They really did. It was just unbelievably what they went through in there. Our time is almost up, and I want to take you to the last section. That's why my notes, I never plan to get through them. They're a resource. You can go back to them and you can check them again. But I'd like you to go to Roman numeral 3, and that is this. What can we do to help the situation? That's where you and I are as youth pastors, as leaders. 3 areas. Number 1, we got to fix our theology. And what I mean by that is not change from Calvinist to Arminius. I'm not talking about that, okay? What I mean by that is this. Number 1, you have to have a good Christian worldview. You have to have a good, clear picture of how this whole thing works and how God fits into that whole thing. We just do. If there's no God, it's naturalistic. We can do anything we want because there's no right, there's no wrong. It's just survival of the fittest. You do what you want, and may the best man win. And we go through that. We also have to have a strong theology of creation. We have to go back and see how God created us, which also leads into the next one, and that is human nature. We reflect the image of God, and if you notice, the image of God is reflected in male and female. It's not reflected in 57 other types. That's how it comes across from Genesis chapter 1. We also have to have a good theology of gender. And we've got to have an understanding of the role of men and women, how it fits. I mean, some branches of Christianity that have really poor theology of women are realizing we got to raise that a little bit. Just ask the Southern Baptists. They're doing some backpedaling right now, okay, in this. Because the Bible brings a very high standard. It brings a real high level of commendation. Men, the women, our wives, complete us. Without it, we're incomplete. That's why God said it's not good. And we go down and look at this. We have to have a good theology of gender, and we have to have a good in Christ understanding. Understanding, because too often today, my identity is wrapped up in what I think I am. But as a Christian, my identity is what I am in Him. That's right. That's why Jesus said, you got to lose yourself, and part of that is you got to lose who you think you are, and you got to gain an idea of who I have made you to be. And my Spirit will guide you to become the person that you're supposed to be. We have to have clear theologies. We can't vacillate. As pastors, we have to encourage all of our staff to nurture, support, especially the kids that don't fit in. Our youth group has to be a safe place for kids that don't fit in. Because if they don't fit in at church, they'll find some place to fit in. They just will. We have to help our workers look past their behavior and look at the human being that's behind it. Look past it, just the sin issue, and look at the human, the person that's there. We need to provide safe places for them. I need to let them speak, let them know that they have value in here, put my arm around them, and so forth. And I know this can get a little scary. But like I said, I've had students, I've had young guys that have had same-sex attraction, and everything in me says don't hug them, but yet the one thing they need is a hug from an adult male. And even though it can be dangerous, it can also be therapeutic. We have to know what our touch, what our feel, what our consideration, what that will mean to some of these kids. There's so much pressure over here. You have them for 2 hours a week. The world has them for the rest of the time. Make those 2 hours good. Make those really good. Offset what the world has to throw. And then as parents, we go down, and it says, affirm you as a pastor, you want to affirm your parents. Our parents get beat up by society. Your dads in your congregations, they're laughed at on almost every sitcom on there. Fathers are made to look like buffoons and idiots. The Me Too thing has just emasculated the male population in our culture, and so forth. We got to reaffirm our parents. They know more about raising their kids than the government. They know more about they know more about their kid, the uniqueness of their kid and so forth, and the school counselors and so forth. We have to let them know you're doing a good job. We have to help improve their relationship, and we also have to tell them, it's okay. When your kid says, I want to make a transition, it's okay to be a parent and say, no. Some parents want to be their friends of their kids. No, you're called to be the parent. And they say, well, I want to change. Let's give it some years, because statistics are this. If you make it to your 20s, you're probably not going to experience your dysphoria anyway. It's a temporary thing. 80% of them go back on it and so forth. So let's just wait a while, think about it, let's pray about it, and work with your kids. Now, as a result, I told you about this. If you like this stuff, if you're interested in this material, you need it. PBC's got some good courses. We've got counseling techniques. We've got advanced counseling where Glenda Malman deals with a lot of these sexual issues, gender issues, addiction issues, and so forth. And consider that. Consider it online if you want to beef up some of your counseling skills. But in hermeneutics 2 years ago, I had the students do a poll. And I said, put on a list of paper what you consider to be some of the biggest sociological problems your generation faces. And number one on the list was identity, sexual identity. Who am I sexually? Who am I as a man? Who am I as a woman? That really got to me. And so I felt to challenge the class, and we did it just this last semester. I said, class, this is the civil rights issue of your day. This is your generation's issue. And you need to have answers when you work at Starbucks, when you work with other people. You have to be able to answer their questions. So what our kids did, and I was so proud of them, they wrote a book called Image. It's 100 pages long. It approaches the psychological aspect of this, the theological, the moral. The students designed it. One of our students drew the cover. It's all these people painting themselves different color. What identity am I going to be? And it's a little guy that's blank saying, what's my choice? What's the image that I'm going to assume? Is it their image, or is it the image of Christ, or one that I determine myself? And they go through and they wrote through. They did a great job. And the last chapter here is nothing but resources, podcasts, YouTube videos, books, pamphlets with write-ups on them, so that if you need material on this, our students found these to be very helpful. And I want to say to this, we're going to give it to you free. It's available. It's on the PBC website. I can give you the code for it here. It's available. You can download it free after this, because our job at PBC, and it's one of the things that we consider very valuable, is to equip people to do their job better, to give them resource, to give them material, and so forth, so that you can be more effective at what you are. So to all of you here today, this is a gift from the students. They designed it. They wrote it. This is their gift to you. And so go back, look at it. It's well done. Now, we did it in 13 weeks, so you're probably going to find a punctuation error occasionally, or maybe even a spelling error. There may be even a Freudian slip in there somewhere, you know. But we've tried to go through it and everything. But remember, that's their generation talking from their heart to their generation. And my final word to you is this. We're going to teach it this summer at Prime. Some of you are familiar with our Prime program. We know that not only do you need to hear about this, our young people need to hear about it too. So this is going to be one of our sessions. It'll be in the third installment of Prime that will be released probably next year at the youth conference when we come back, and so forth. So God bless you guys. Let's go out and save some young people. Amen.